Thank you for the invitation. Does anybody know, most of you probably do, does anybody know where the first all-female city council was elected in the 1800s? Oskaloosa, Kansas. Do you know where the third was? Baldwin City, Kansas. On the west side of Baldwin City, there's a bridge that's called the Women's Bridge. Do you know why it's called the Women's Bridge? The reason the women ran for city council in the 1800s, so women had the right to vote for school district and then city very early on. The train station, you had to cross a creek, and they kept asking for a bridge because it got their dresses, dirty and stuff. And the city council wouldn't do it, so they all ran for office. And they built a bridge, and they built sidewalks, which is why Oskaloosa also ran, because they wanted sidewalks. So they were into infrastructure. They got them built, and then they didn't run. Kansas has a very progressive history about elections, especially women's right to vote. So, I always love to tell that story. So, Kelly gave me kind of an outline of what she wanted me to go over. I don't get asked a lot to talk about city school elections. So I'm going to dive into the weeds a little bit. You're going to learn more about city school elections than you probably want to know. I get, during a presidential election, everybody wants me to talk, right? But city school elections are actually the most complex elections we run. Presidential is big, governor is big, but they're actually pretty simple to run, and you're going to find out why city school elections are complex to run. This also has some audience participation, right? You're a very educated audience, so you'll probably already know this, but we have about 80,000 registered voters. Out of 106 counties, where do we rank in the size of voter population? Fifth. About 54% of the population lives in 5 counties, and we're the 5th largest. How many school districts are in Douglas County? 7. Who said 7? Oh, yes, there are 7. There are 7. We'll talk about school districts. The average turnout for a November city school election is what?
10%.
Oh, have a little hope, right? It's actually a trick question, and we'll talk about it, but right now it sits about 22%, 23%. There was a moment it was at about 15, 16%. So, so what we're getting ready to do is have a primary for the city of Lawrence, and we'll talk about why the city of Lawrence is having a primary. And then in November, all the cities will be on the ballot, all the schools will be on the ballot, and drainage districts. We're going to talk about drainage districts because that's kind of an election that most people don't realize is there, but is an extremely important election. These are the school districts in Douglas County. So the way it works in Kansas is if the majority of the school district is in your county, you are considered the home county. So that's where candidates file. You handle the taxes and so forth. So we are the home county for 3, which is Lawrence, Eudora, and Baldwin. But all of those go into other counties, and this is where it gets kind of complicated. So you'll see on election night, we'll report results for Franklin County, Leavenworth County, other counties, because they're voting on Lawrence or they're voting on Eudora and Baldwin. Then you have the Perry-Lecompton School District, the Shawnee Heights School District, Santa Fe Trail, and Wellsville. And what makes it really complex is school districts are not required to follow any rhyme or reason to their boundaries. So when you look at state senate or state representative or something, they have to follow the census blocks. School districts, whenever they did unification, randomly, if you wanted to be in a school district, you could ask to be part of that school district. So this right here, this is the western part, this is Clinton Lake. Shawnee Heights is right here, but evidently these people wanted to go to Perry-Lecompton. So Perry-Lecompton comes in and takes these houses, but then Shawnee Heights comes in here, right? My other favorite is Wellsville down here. There's a little finger that comes all the way out here and grabs some houses. So when you're figuring out ballots, you can't go by census block. You are literally going house by house to figure out who's getting what ballot. And that's what makes it extremely complicated, because you have all of these little school jurisdictions that you're looking at. The other thing is, in the state of Kansas, there are 3 voting plans for school districts, and they get to choose. We have 2 that are evident in Douglas County. So like Eudora and Lawrence, they are an at-large, you vote for everybody. Then there are districts. So the rest of them are districts. In some school districts, you can only vote for the school board member in your district, both primary and general. For all of ours, we're voting plans, they're voting plan C, and so if there were a primary, only people that lived in that district could be voted in the primary, but in the general, you vote for everybody. Just to make that also interesting. So let's talk about drainage districts. How many of you are aware of drainage districts? Oh, fantastic. Okay. A lot of people don't realize drainage districts, and drainage districts are really unique to run for elections. So we're going to look at the maps of drainage districts. There are 3 board members, and they are elected on because they actually have the ability to have a mill. So they get to decide on taxes. So we're going to elect them, right? But in order to vote in a drainage district, you have to be 18 years old, own land in the district, not required to live in the district, and not required to be a registered voter in the county. So as long as you own land, if you live in Johnson County and you own land in that district, you get to vote. So there's a separate poll book that I have to come up with that is based off of the ownership list for land. So when people come in and vote, they're going to sign in the poll book if they're registered to vote there, and then they're going to go to another poll book to see if they're there. And then when it gets really interesting, it is based off of basically what the title is for your land. So if a husband is listed and the wife is not, the husband gets to vote in drainage district, the wife does not. If it is a trust, which there are lots of trusts, right? It is basically whoever gets the thing to pay the taxes. So not everybody in the family gets to vote. So it gets a little complicated. In fact, probably one of the more intense elections I've ever run was a drainage district. In fact, and I remember it because it was very early in my time, and it was the first drainage district thing, and all the veteran clerks were like, oh, that's a piece of cake. That was not a piece of cake. It was a contested election, and people were going over and we were saying, well, you can and you can't based off of who pays taxes. Renters do not get to participate, so people, it was not a pleasant situation. And it gets complicated for the poll workers, right? Because you have a separate book that you have to look at. And drainage districts also don't follow any type of understanding. So what you see here, this is the Douglas County Call. This is probably our most active drainage district. This would be basically North Lawrence, parts of Grant Township, parts of North Wakarusa. This is the Wakarusa, Haskell, Eudora, which is the southern part. So basically you're seeing that these are places where drainage, because what drainage districts do is they like clear culverts and that type of stuff. So this is the southern part of the county. And then this is the Wakarusa Call, which would kind of be out east of town. There's another drainage district, which is Weaver Bottoms, but it was formed after 1905, and they actually had a selection process, but they're not an election process. So that's what makes that kind of interesting. Yes?
One quick question. If a person doesn't have to live in the drainage district, but they have to own land personally in the district, do they have to, let's say it's a Douglas County drainage, but they live in Johnson County, do they have to be registered to vote in Johnson County?
So, interesting. In order to serve as a member, you have to own land in the district and reside in the county for which the district is.
Oh, okay.
If no one runs that resides in the county, then someone who owns land but doesn't reside in the district can then be in that spot. But you also don't have to be registered to vote. So you could actually own land, live in Colorado, and come back here and vote if you wanted to vote in the drainage district.
I'm genuinely asking.
Yes.
Because I didn't see it. Do you have to be a U.S. citizen?
Well, the law says 18 years old and own land.
That's what I'm asking.
Yes.
Okay.
That is what the law says. Right. Usually they're not contentious. In fact, I believe nobody has filed for Wakarusa, Haskell, Eudora. And 3 have filed for each of the others. So, yes. Yes?
If you own land and don't live here, do you have to be present to vote, or can you write in?
You can do a mail ballot if you contact us. There's a process to do that. Yeah.
Thank you.
So what triggers a primary election? Yes?
Why is it important?
Well, it's really important if you own land out there and making sure that the culverts are clear and that the water is draining properly and so forth. And so that was kind of what was going on with that contentious one that was the North Lawrence one. There was a feeling that the drainage district wasn't doing enough to kind of control flooding. And so there were people that wanted to get on the board that felt like maybe they should do more taxes and stuff to do. So it's to deal with flooding. Those are all on floodplains. Yeah. So what triggers a primary election? I get this question a lot. The law was changed in 2015, and what it says is for all jurisdictions, except for the city of Lawrence, and we'll talk about why, a primary election gets triggered if 3 times the number of open seats plus 1 files. So if you have 2 school board seats, you're going to need 7 people to file for there to be a primary, right? Because you need to be able to eliminate 1. The bar was lower before that, and the legislature kind of said, we're running all of these kind of primaries that nobody's really showing up to, and the cost is borne by the entity, not by the county. This is the only space where the county's not paying for it, right? So they made it 3 times plus 1. But a city has charter power. And the first year after that happened, there was no primary at all. And the city said they really didn't like that there was a primary, so they passed a charter that took it to the old rule, which is 2 times the number of open seats plus 1. So that's why the city usually has a primary and the school district does not. Even if it had been 3 times, we would have been there for this election. But that's why the city of Lawrence has it and the school district does not. Now, what that means is the city pays the direct costs for all the parts of the election in August. So they don't pay my salary, they don't pay the other salaries, but they pay for the ballots, poll workers, polling places, and that type of stuff. And when they kind of made that decision, it used to be the school district shared that cost, but now the school district doesn't have a primary. So that's why you don't see across the state very many places that have primaries. It's interesting, I'll throw in a few things as we go along. There are a lot of states that are starting to go to, Missouri just went to this, that if the same number of people file, the entity can decide not to have a general election and just go ahead with the people that have filed. So overseas ballots just went out on Friday. The last day to register to vote is July 15th. In-person will start on July 16th. The last day to ask for a mail ballot is July 29th. In-person always stops at noon the day before the election. The election is August 5th from 7 to 7. Post-election audit is August 11th, and the canvass is August 18th. We'll talk about all of those, but I want to talk about turnout a little bit, all right? So the 23 turnout for the city primary, and there was a school district thing, was about 10%. Whenever you look at Douglas County's percentages, you have to kind of look at precinct by precinct. And here's why. Precinct 10 had a 0.18% turnout. That is Daisy Hill, right, in August. Precinct 8 had a 3% turnout. But Precinct 2 had a 19% turnout, and Precinct 48 had a 17% turnout. All right? So I always caution people, when you look at Douglas County's turnout, go look at the precincts, because especially in an August election, the precincts that have a lot of students in it kind of drag our turnout down a little bit. 21 was 10%, 17 was 10%, 15 is 13%, 13 is 8%. Why is 13 so low? And I put a little light blue. That's the blizzard election. We ran that in 18 inches of snow. So it's great we had 5,000 people show up. 2009 was 14%. 7 is 50% and 60%. Another thing that I want to point out. So in 2015, the law was also changed to move the elections from the spring to the fall. The idea was to kind of increase turnout. Well, Douglas County historically has struggled with turnout in August, whether it's even year or odd year. And you can see it here, right? So this is before the election, 14, 15, 16. After that, 10, 10, 10. It had an impact on turnout in the primary. I love statistics. I run my office by statistics. It makes me nervous. I've got 13 people running. And if 8,000 people show up or 7,000 people, you spread that out about 13 people, I have a really strong chance that the decision between 4 and 5 is going to be by a handful of votes. General 25, September 20, we'll send out election overseas. The 14th is the last day register to vote. 15th is when in-person will start. 28th is the last day to ask for a mail ballot. In-person ends on the 3rd. We have the election on the 4th. Post-election audit on the 10th. Canvass on the 17th. Let's look at turnout for the general. Now it increases. So 23, we had 26%, 20,000 voters. Once again, look at your precincts. Precinct 10 had 1.6, precinct 7, 8.4, but then precinct 21, 44%. Precinct 60, 41%. That's Baldwin. Baldwin had really intense races for school board in the last election. So they were all at 40% or above, right? 21 is 22%, 19 is 24%, 17, 23, 15, 16, 16, 13, 14. So here's my favorite story. When we did voter ID in 2012, I tried to think about how do we tell voters what's going on. So we started sending out mailers in September before the election that said, here's everything about the election and here's advanced voting applications. And we only did that in even years. But then when the law happened in 2015 that changed the date of the election, I was worried that people wouldn't know there was an election going on. So we started sending out that mailer in September of odd years, right here. We increased that simple mailer, and I can see it in the statistics, that simple mailer is the cause of this increase in participation in that odd year. And that's huge. It's really big because last year, or the last session of the legislature, there was discussion about saying that counties can't send out that kind of mailer. It didn't pass, but that mailer has a huge impact on our turnout in odd year, but also even year. And then 07, 19, and then 05 is 38%. So you may know why 05 was so much higher. There was a constitutional amendment about gay marriage that was placed on that April ballot. So this isn't the first time the legislature has put constitutional amendments on random elections that aren't general elections, right? That was the second election I ran. So that was interesting.
Jamie?
Yes.
Excuse me. When you give those percentages, is that of registered voters or potential, or the population that's eligible?
Registered. That is not voter age population.
Okay.
So voter age population would bring it down.
Yeah.
But that's registered active and inactive voters. This is the other one I like to talk about for a city school election. There is a huge disparity in turnout by age for city school elections. 18 to 24% is 7%. 25 to 44 is 17, 45 to 66, 30, 66 plus is 49%. I like to talk, and lately I've really talked about, I just spoke to Girls State a few weeks ago, about the way that you really use your power is that you show up for every election. And I give 22 as an example. The August of 22 election, over 50% of 18 to 24-year-olds showed up. And that was huge. I think that changed the entire election. In November of 22, only 30% showed up. So, and yes, that's great that you showed up in August of 22 because of that issue, but then you need to show up because a bunch of people got elected in November of 22 that then are passing policies that are changing what we said in August, right? And so I talked to them about showing up in city school elections. politicians will listen to you if you show up to vote every election. But if you're only showing up for the big ones and not showing up for the small ones, I hate to say it, but politicians are going to be like, yeah, these are the people I want to listen to, right? Because they always show up and they're going to elect me. And I try to talk to them about the decisions that are being made by the school districts and by the city are probably more impactful than the president. And you show up and you vote for president, but you need to show up and you need to vote for city and school. Kelly asked if I'd talk about advanced voting, kind of a hot topic right now. So let me give you a history of advanced voting in Kansas, because Kansas has been very progressive about advanced voting. And there are a lot of discussions right now about advanced voting in Kansas. You hear a lot of things about we should only have election day, right? We have never had election day, all right? We have always had some sort of advanced voting in Kansas. In 1868, we allowed soldiers to vote by mail or outside of their home county. Then in 1902, we allowed railroad workers and itinerant workers to vote by mail and vote outside of their county. We were one of the first states to allow that to happen. Now, soldiers had happened during the Civil War, but then we kind of expanded it. Mail voting for any voter who couldn't get to their polling place due to an illness or disability happened in 1953. We were one of the first to do that. Then in 1967, we said we would open it to everybody as long as you had some sort of excuse why you're going to be out of the county. And a lot of states still have that. Missouri still has that. But in 1997, we said no excuse advance voting. So starting 20 days prior, you show up, you get to vote. And we could do it by mail or we could do it in person. We were the first in the Midwest to do that. Does anybody know what kind of caused that? It was the '96 election in Johnson County. The lines were so big that people were voting well into the morning because of not having, advanced voting for us, I refer to it as kind of my pressure valve. I need a certain amount of people to advance vote to keep us from having huge lines on election day, right? And that's where that came from. Outside of the Western states, we were one of the first to kind of expand advanced voting. Then that made 2020, really, we were way more prepared for pandemic voting than most states. Our voters were. So for a lot of states, their voters weren't used to advanced voting. For us, our voters were used to it. So I think when you look at 2026 on, there's lots of discussions about advanced voting. It's going to be really difficult for a legislator to argue against something that's been happening for this long in this state, especially in Western Kansas. In Western Kansas, where they've gone down to like 1 polling place or 2 polling places, advanced voting is really big because it's difficult to get to that polling place on election day. And especially, does anybody know why we vote on Tuesday? It's because of agrarian America in the early 1800s. You used to have to go to the polling place for the drunken brawl when the polling places were run by the parties, because the government doesn't start doing that until the 1880s, and you had to go there. So you did it on Tuesdays so that you didn't have to travel on the Sabbath, and you didn't impact market day, which was usually Thursday or Friday, and that's why we vote on Tuesday. We stick to this model that is due to the early 1800s, right? And also, when you have a lot of people kind of saying election day is election day, who is elected on election night? Nobody. Because it isn't until the canvass, where we've done provisional ballots, which Kansas was also a progressive state about, that it is official at the local level, and then the state canvass is official at the state level. It's never been, and I always tell the press, nobody's elected on Tuesday night, right? So let's talk about the grace period. In 2017, actually before that, a number of us started talking about the post office is having problems getting us ballots, including how many of you noticed that you don't get mail on Tuesday? They don't process mail on the weekends unless it's priority mail, and so watch your mail. There is literally no mail on Tuesday. Tuesday's election day. And we started noticing that we would get just a couple ballots on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday, we'd get a whole bunch of ballots, and they were postmarked from the week before. So we started talking about, hey, what if we had kind of this grace period? It was an extremely bipartisan, only one person voted against that bill. It was led by people from Western Kansas, Eastern Kansas, urban, rural. There was no controversy about this bill to give us the 3-day grace period. And in it, it said there had to be clear proof of mail date. So we wouldn't accept a ballot unless we could show that it was mailed before, because that was one thing legislators asked about. Well, what if somebody dropped it in the mail at 8 after, results have been announced? So that's what that was there for. And it is an example of what I call voter-centric legislation. The legislature at that point was very focused on what I call voter-centric legislation, things that are good for the voter, access to the ballot. In Douglas County, that actually had a huge impact for us. So the August 2020 election, on election night, one candidate was ahead by about 100 votes. When we got the ballots on Wednesday and Thursday that clearly had been sent the week before and added them, that lead got down to about 20 votes. Then, when we did the provisionals, that lead flipped and it changed the race. And all those ballots we added were not just random ballots that I said, oh, let's just add those. They were clearly marked, and the voter did what they were supposed to do. And part of it is, we no longer live in a world where you're gonna drop your ballot in the mailbox and I'm gonna get it in a couple days. We are the only county that can track ballots kind of like an Amazon package, right? So I know how long it takes for a ballot to get across the city. Does anybody have a guess in 2024, if you mailed your ballot from 66049 to our office at 66047, how long it took to get to our office?
10.
It was about 9 days. It was 8 to 9 days. Okay? So Kansas has 20 days. I can't mail ballots for 20 days. So let's say it takes 7 to 9 days to get to your house, and then it's going to take 7 to 9 days to get to me. Your window to vote is really, really small. The joke, I talked about I could walk it to your house faster. The Secretary of State the Secretary of State and I were both extremely vocal about the post office in 2024. His was that the Pony Express moved faster than the post office currently. If you followed in August of 24, we made national press because I received 200 ballots that had been mailed in the middle of July, and I got them after the canvass in August. And the post office could not tell me why they were just kind of stuck in some sort of circulation. Senate Bill 4 removes the grace period, so it will be gone starting in January 1 of 26. And I always find it interesting when legislation waits, right? So if it was so important, then you should have just made it now. But I think this is an example of post-2020 political legislation. And we're going to talk about it, but the legislature, not all the legislature, but the legislature has changed kind of the way they see election legislation. I've been saying this for a while, and I hope that at some point I can take this slide down. But we are in one of the most important eras of voting, with challenges not only to election administration, but election law and perception of voter rights. And it just kind of keeps getting worse, and I'm waiting for that moment that slide doesn't exist. Our current environment. We still fight mis, dis, and malinformation. People who either purposefully are putting out information about elections that isn't true, or just spreading stuff that isn't true, but not really checking the facts before you do it. And that happens on all sides, by the way, right? I mean, before you hit retweet or whatever, check where that's coming from, or call me. I love a person's like, hey, I was at the coffee shop, they were talking about the elections, and I said, I'll call Jamie Shew. And I'm like, I love that, because I could say that's actually not true, in a polite way. This is one, okay, with everything that's going on in the world, I know there's certain things that kind of get lost. This one has gotten lost, and this is major in elections. All support from the federal government for cybersecurity support and elections funding for cybersecurity is gone. They fired everybody. They got rid of all the funding. We have been under attack for many elections from outside entities. And for smaller counties, this really impacts smaller counties. So for Douglas County, we have a great IT team. Our IT director came from LMH. In her first federal election, she came to me, she goes, I am shocked at how many times you're getting attacked. I'm like, yeah, welcome to elections, right? For smaller counties, CISA was the huge thing that was protecting them, and it's gone. So this is one of our biggest concerns in 26, because CISA was going out and they were doing vulnerability tests. They were looking at any county could get free services where they could not only look at vulnerability tests on cybersecurity, but DHS would send out and they would look at the physical security of your office. You need cameras, you need this, you need that. It was a free service. All of that is gone. Funding. In Kansas, it is total local control funding. There is no state funding for elections. There is no federal funding for elections. So it depends on your county. I am lucky. I am in a county that is extremely supportive of our office. Not all counties are lucky. You see that in the legislative post-audit that happened a couple years ago where they looked at all kinds of different county sizes. When they looked at security and so forth, those of us that were bigger, we can afford cameras, key card access, all kinds of security. The smaller counties fail. Because when you talk about adding cameras, there's a monthly fee to that I have to pay. That monthly fee is hundreds of dollars. If you're a smaller county in Kansas, that's a lot to your budget. So the legislature is really good at saying you should be doing all these things, but we're not going to give you any money, right? It's an unfunded mandate. Legislation, HR 22. I refer to it as HR 22 because I will not refer to it as the SAFE Act. I didn't do this when we did voter ID, because when you use that word, then you give it power because they've named it that, like, right? So HR 22 is what is called the SAFE Act, and that is the citizenship part of federal government. First of all, from what we hear, it's kind of stuck in the US Senate. There's concerns about it. Now it could get unstuck. And it is the one, you know, the United States is so interesting because we are one of the few countries where the onus to register and prove yourself is on the voter. Most countries, they automatically register people to vote. They know where you are. They know you're 18, right? And they prove citizenship. We have databases, right? We can prove citizenship. So why should we have to make it? If you read that legislation, first of all, it's an administrative nightmare. But that legislation says that you will have to physically come to our office and show your proof of citizenship. And by the way, if you're married, I also need your proof of name. And then we have to not only just say that we saw it, we have to what the document is, when it was issued, where it was issued for every voter. I'm going to have to hire all kinds of staff to do that. When the databases and stuff exist that we could do that, right? So it's not there necessarily to prove citizenship. It is there to make it harder to register to vote. State legislation, I kind of touched on this. A couple of years ago, there was an interim committee on elections with the House and the Senate. They were going to look at elections. County clerks were not invited to testify. The County Clerks Association was actually told, we don't want you to testify. The Secretary of State, I think, was given 30 minutes, 15 minutes. But there was a whole list of conspiracy people who got to testify for hours. And it kind of shows that back when we passed that legislation in 2015, 2017, it was very voter-centric with a great partnership between election officials, legislators from both sides of the aisle, and we were doing some really good stuff. But post-2020, legislation has been built on kind of hyperbole, myths, rumors, and it is extremely political, not necessarily voter-centric. We still are dealing with external and physical threats. Loss of knowledge. I think there are 106 counties. I think 27 were elected in November, brand new county clerks. Since 2020, we're now up to, I think, 60 are brand new, right? Suddenly I'm one of the old people. But not just that, but you're seeing a lot of turnover and stuff in Secretary of State offices or state election officials. We have a huge election coming up next year. The Secretary of State is going to be running for governor, so that office will be open. So there'll be a lot of people that are running for it. And it used to be the people that ran for like state election, it's a very administrative job, right? But it's kind of like a lot of county clerk offices lately where people are running for it for political reasons, not necessarily for the glitz and glamour, right? Legal challenges. We are currently under a number of legal challenges for some laws that were passed. That is the way it is across the country. And the problem with legal challenges is courts operate at their own pace. And often a decision will be made, I don't know, a couple weeks before an election, which creates confusion for voters because they don't really know what that landscape looks like. I think some of the things that are there, like the 3-day grace period, there is a legal challenge to that. There are legal challenges. This House Resolution 22, if it passes, will instantly go to court and will end up in the Supreme Court. And that will take some time. And that leads to voter anxiety and confusion. I get so many phone calls. People are so worried about the right to vote and how we vote. And so we talk about in our office that we are to be the calm center of the storm. There's a hurricane around us and we're the eye of the storm, right? And we build our office based off law, best practices, checks and balances, and that I like it when somebody comes in and they're really anxious and I'll sit down and talk to them and just kind of pull that fear down. I get this joke a lot. Are we even gonna have elections in 26? Yes, we will have elections in 26, all right? But that's the level of anxiety. And some of the things like Kansas does post-election audits. So after every election, we pull 1% of the precincts and we will hand count them. And we've never been off across the state, right? We require pre-election public testing. And actually, it used to be 5 days before the election. And this is one thing the legislature did I thought was really good. Public testing's now moved to 30 days prior, which is really great because we were deploying advanced. Now, I tested, but public testing was happening after we had started advanced voting. But this way, it is before advanced voting. Like I mentioned, we're the only ones that can track ballots, so that has helped us before. So we're able to see stuff. In 2020, randomly, I think it was 8 Douglas County ballots ended up in Puerto Rico, and I could see it. We didn't send them to Puerto Rico. They were addressed all over the county. So we were able to call the voters and say, your ballot is sending randomly. I offered to fly there, but I don't have that kind of budget. So we were able to get them a replacement ballot. So that's a huge thing for us, that we're able to say, clearly your ballot is in Puerto Rico. We're gonna get you a replacement ballot and you're gonna be able to vote. We mentioned RFID technology. We were the first one in the country to do this. You can see it right here. All of our equipment now has little tags on it. And these are the things that are kind of used in like Best Buy and stuff if you were trying to steal something. So that little scanner right there, we can scan the equipment and we can know that it's in there. When we deliver to polling places, we scan the polling place and we register that it's there. So we can follow our equipment all around. Then we know if it leaves the warehouse because we also have scanners for that. So that has been a pretty simple solution. I couldn't believe nobody had really kind of thought about it. But then we're able to track it. So when legislative post audit said, well, are you able to account for your equipment? And we're like, sure, we can run you really detailed lists. You've heard me talk about this, but voter registration continues to be a huge. Yes.
Yeah, I did have a question.
Yeah.
What's the public pre-voting testing for? What is that?
So what we do is, you're invited to come to it. We bring in poll workers. You can participate in it, but for every machine that gets deployed, you run ballots through it, and then you run results, and you look at it and you say those results are right, and then we seal everything up, and then it gets deployed. Yeah.
Now, is that required, or is that?
Yes, that's required.
That is required.
And that's been required for decades in Kansas. Bureaucracy. When you hear legislators and stuff talk about, well, it's a simple form, no big deal. We have many voters for which literacy is a challenge. So when you add a form, that is a barrier, right? when you talk about, we have experience with citizenship. I'm getting all kinds of phone calls from election officials across the country going, okay, how did you deal with it? And I was honest with them. It was administratively hard, but it was also a lot for voters. So, we came up with the idea that we would pay for birth certificates. And we'll put that in place. If HR 22 happens, we'll put that in place again. What we found was we only paid for probably about $200 worth of birth certificates. But the biggest thing we did was we created a thing about how do you apply in every state. And we helped more people with that. Each state is different. And so we had a spreadsheet that said, here's where you apply, here's how you apply, here's how long it takes. If you're applying for a birth certificate in California, you need to apply months ahead of time. You are not going to get that in a couple days. And then perception of a broken system. This is one that I'm really worried about. We continue to just chip away at trust in the system. Now, you should challenge it. You should never, I'm a firm believer, you should always ask questions. But politicians, if they lose a race, suddenly the problem is the election, right? But, and if you're 18 to 24 years old, your entire life is past 2000, right? You have heard your entire life that elections is broken. So I think it was the Pew Center did something a couple years ago. They asked 18 to 24-year-olds if choosing your own leader mattered. 25% said no. And I've got kids in that kind of age range. A lot of their friends sit there and say, the system doesn't work, we're not participating, we're not going to be part of it. That's a concern because it is the foundation of everything, right? You don't get any, and we'll talk about that, but you don't get any rights or anything unless you have the ability to choose your own leaders. So I changed this, it used to be, do you have any questions? I changed it to, I read on the internet, because that's what I hear a lot, right? So I covered a lot of stuff. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
Were you deposed in 2018 for the court case, or do you know if any other county clerks were deposed or offered testimony?
Yeah, I don't know which one. I've been deposed in a number of
the
things.
one for documentary proof of citizenship?
Yes.
You,
I think so. Yes. I don't know. Seriously, I have been deposed on a number of things. Currently, too, also. I don't remember on that one. I think so.
my leaders are asking me.
Yeah.
So if HR 22 passes, I, as a previously married woman, divorced 100 times, I have to bring all of those names, all of that, right?
Yes. Now, the thing that's not addressed, there's a number of things not addressed in that law, and I've read everything through it. It does not address if you're already registered to vote. And that's a huge question. Well, it doesn't say that you don't have to if you're already registered to vote. It doesn't say that you have to. It's kind of this vague area. The feeling is that you would. Now in Kansas, we'd be a little different because we've already kind of gone through certification. But let's say you were brand new. Yes, you would have to bring that in. Yeah.
To follow up to that, do you feel like the November 26th ballot question is really supposed to just be a reflection of the HR 22 so that if it fails at the federal level, then we still have that?
Well, so to clarify, there's two constitutional amendments coming up.
Yeah.
One is in August, which is about judges. The other one is about being a citizen to vote. It is already in the Kansas Constitution. Kansas Constitution already requires it.
Yes,
It is kind of a reiteration of what exists. It is there to drive turnout and drive fear about people voting that are not citizens.
My understanding of it was that it would put me in the same situation that
Yeah.
Dan described it.
Yeah.
With all the licenses and the divorce decree.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, so we're currently, our law still exists, but we're under a stay from the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, who declared that it was unconstitutional. Arizona, which was the other part of the other state, they're not part of the 10th Circuit, so they are still doing citizenship. So we are sitting on that law just because the 10th Circuit has held it. Yeah.
you talk about how the younger people didn't vote, and, I've worked a little bit with League of Women Voters to register young people. I even called you about this. How do we get them to register? Are there rules about, which Elon Musk broke, but can you give a rally where you give them free food to get them to come and register? Or is that's rules to kind of pay them to register?
We changed it, used to be you couldn't do any, is it $5 now? Or what's the, Senator, do you remember? It used to be you could offer nothing.
Okay.
Because I had to stop Starbucks at one point for giving out, if you showed your I voted sticker, you got free Starbucks. This was years ago.
Okay.
And then it was decided that there would be a de minimis, so it was like $2, $3 that you could, like if you were giving a cup of coffee or something like that. And those rules exist because of what you just talked about. First of all, it used to be you couldn't serve alcohol on election day for that reason. But it also used to be that candidates would give you beer or other things if you voted for them. And so that's why those rules are there. Those rules exist in like Wisconsin and stuff, but have been applied. But yeah, there is, I think you'd be allowed to check with your lawyer.
Some pizza party.
Yeah.
That they get a slice, they get pizza when they show up, and you
Well-
don't like say, prove to me you just registered. But
Yeah.
you're hoping they understand.
Yeah, I
why
think-
you're throwing them.
I think what's better is I've seen where groups will meet in South Park and do kind of a little thing, and then everybody walks over and advance votes.
Okay, that's vote, I'm just
Right.
what's young, okay, so.
Yeah.
Get them to, we want young people to register and then get them to vote.
Yeah.
And so my follow-up question about that, is there still a rule about how many ballots, advanced ballots, I could take to a Dropbox as a friend?
You can't, what the rule is 10. That is also in legal challenge and so forth, but it is 10 for the entire election, not at a time.
Okay. Okay.
Correct.
In each election, right?
Yes, each election.
10 primary, 10 general.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
right.
Okay.
Not for the year.
And,
Yeah.
and is there anything about driving people to the polls?
No.
Okay.
That's coming next.
Jamie, I think she was asking about rewards for registering to vote, which is different.
Registering to vote, I don't think there's a,
vote.
yeah.
So if you're just saying, we want you to register to vote, I don't know.
Yeah, registering to vote, there's not anything on that.
Okay.
But I
Okay,
always-
put Elon in there. 'cause
And
that's
you and I had a great conversation about this. People are always like, we registered 100 people. I'm like, but did you get 100 people to vote?
I know,
Right? I mean, like, registering is the first step. The second step is voting.
right.
So,
And that's why, after we talked, I thought about this. Can you rent a big voting van and drive around and say, come vote at this ready, like the library has a mobile library thing.
yeah.
Can you have a mobile voting place?
I've actually played with
Wow. Voting is tied to a place. So,
During the pandemic, I thought about it.
Yeah.
I had lots of ideas in the pandemic. We were gonna drive through voting at the fairgrounds. So we didn't get to that point. I had a whole system for that. So it's tied to a place, but as the legislature has toyed with ballot box
Yeah.
changes,
Yeah.
one of the things we've talked about is setting up mobile receipt stations, where you could drop off your already voted ballot with a bipartisan board at various places if ballot boxes were kind of taken away.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And one more thing, when I talked to you, I also asked the question to you about the trans. Is that kind of like the women who've been divorced? You said there might be some kind of affidavit you could sign that said, I am John now, even
Yeah.
though I was born Mary.
So there's currently an affidavit that you can sign for photo ID that explains why your name does not match, and that you turn that in, and that deals with that.
Okay.
Going back to HR 22, it's a little silent on that.
Okay.
But there is a part in there about an affidavit, but that one makes election officials a little nervous because what it says is that the election official makes the decision on why a person doesn't have a birth certificate if they fill out the affidavit. But there is a felony charge if it is found out that that person did have a birth certificate or something against the election official. And that has election officials kind of reading that part a little nervous. There's a growing part within the states to add more felonies against election officials in the performance of their duties.
Is there any movement to make a holiday for voting day?
So that has been discussed. My concern about it has always been they discuss it for the presidential election, but if you're going to do it, you do it for city school also. So currently, I would love that or Saturday or something like that, because if you close the schools, I could use the schools as polling places. Right now, for security reasons, we don't use the schools as polling places. The polling places that I can use is getting narrower and narrower. And if you had a holiday, not only you get the schools, you could have teachers that could be poll workers, you know, that type of stuff. It's been discussed, but it hasn't gotten very far. And largely because what we have said is, well, then you need to do it for every election, not just the big ones. Sorry.
So what is the current situation with requiring a birth certificate to register? Is that still up in the air, or has it been?
It's not at this moment.
Hmm?
You don't need to do it at this moment.
At this moment?
At this moment, no.
That's the 10th Circuit stay.
Right, that's the 10th Circuit stay has that on hold. And by the way, this was a few years ago, Supreme Court. Supreme Court refused to take it. So that's why it's sitting in the 10th Circuit. Because once the Supreme Court says, well, yeah, we're not going to take it, then it sits as ordered. But that was a few years ago, Supreme Court.
What is your current advice on mailing in ballots?
So one of the things that we're talking about is how we communicate more. If you're going to mail, do it early. Don't wait until the Friday before the election. I'm not going to get it. So use a Dropbox or something like that. And so we're adding to our literature and stuff that basically says it needs to be in the mail at least a week before the election to guarantee that I would get it. And even then, that's not a guarantee. In November of 24, a lot of the ballots that we received in the day after had been mailed 10 days before. I mean, so yeah, if you're within a week, it's got to get to our office a different way. And you can drop it off at your polling place also. Now, that was one thing we got in that legislation. You can drop it off at any polling place. It doesn't have to be your polling place. It can be any polling place. You can drop it off. And we've got a little secure thing that you could just put it in. And if you're unable to get in there, the poll workers will come out and get it.
But that would just be day of, right?
Day of. But you can drop it off. If you don't want to use the ballot box, you can call us. We'll meet you and pick it up outside your thing. I also have teams that have picked up ballots. And then like when you talk about signatures and stuff like that, I have a bipartisan team. Like if you forgot your signature, they go to your house and get your signature to make sure that, you know, because for some people, when you talk about getting rid of advanced voting, for some people they cannot get out of the house. So that is their way to vote. And I don't want to have to then say, well, you have to get here, right? So we're going to figure out a way to get to you.
Do you have a need for more volunteers and poll workers?
Right now, we're doing okay for city school. The bigger elections, we're always looking for people. The one great thing about this community is I don't usually struggle to get people. So if you do sign up and we don't use you, especially this year, it's because we don't use as many people. We try to use as many people as we can. So I won't turn people away. The one thing that we also talk about is the boards have to have party parity. So sometimes we're moving people around because we need a Republican here or a Democrat here or a Libertarian here. And there's also lots of opportunities in our office leading up to the election. So we have all of these audit boards that are checking things for advance and so forth that we also have party parity on. So there's also opportunities if you can't do election day.
Is today sign day, 45 days before the primary
Is this 45?
Pretty sure.
Yes, yeah, that'd be
That
right.
seems close, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, because I always remember because Uocava federal has to be out 45 days out.
Yeah.
So yes,
Okay.
right. But I want to be clear. I do not control the signs. I am not the sign police. I get lots of people who call and complain about signs, and I'm like, you got to deal with your city or the sheriff or planning and zoning. I am not the sign police. Unless it's 250 feet from your polling place. Which, by the way, we are one of the largest radiuses that is in Louisiana is 500 feet, which is crazy. Most are about 75 to 100. I grew up in Missouri, but I've been here long enough that it's washed off. But Missouri is 25. So candidates can follow you pretty much to the door. And when I got here, I'm like, this is the most sterile election day environment there is, because I was used to like signs and stuff being handed to you, and so it's kind of nice. But I will say 250 feet, the problem with it, sometimes it goes into people's yards, and we have to kind of deal with that. And sometimes that gets a little touchy because that's a person's yard. Somebody had a hand.
Well, I have one more thing. What is the, what percent of eligible voters what percent of eligible voters in Douglas County are registered?
I think at the last VAP that I saw, we were 85%.
Wow.
Yeah, we were actually pretty high. We're difficult because of our population is so transitory. List maintenance is something we're constantly doing, but I think we were at about 85%, which was actually really good. Yeah. So to kind of wrap up, you guys have seen this before because I always end it with this. First of all, I think we are still trying to answer the question, is voting a right or a privilege? Where's the right to vote in the original Constitution? It doesn't exist. And because of that, our country continues to have a conversation of, is it a right or a privilege? It isn't as laid out. I mean, Kansas declared itself a constitutional carry state a few years ago, right? And by saying that, then there's no law that can impede your right to bear arms, right? I mean, wouldn't it be cool if we were a constitutional vote state? When you talk about it being a right, then that means you automatically have that right and nothing can stop you from having that right. But when you talk about it being a privilege, then you're saying somebody like me gets to decide whether you get to vote or not. And that's a slippery slope, and we are not that far away from when that was a big deal. I mean, go look at the Louisiana literacy test. That was given in the 1960s. And Louisiana literacy test was draw a circle in a circle. And it didn't matter where you could draw a circle. Somebody like me stood there and looked at you and decided whether you fit what should vote. That's what the deal is when you talk about it being a privilege. And LBJ, when he spoke to Congress on voting rights, this is what guides me, where he said the most basic right of all is the ability to choose your own leader. Nothing else matters, right? And sometimes I feel like we're playing a little fast and loose with that basic right, because I do believe it is a right. If you ever have questions, please contact me. I love to answer questions. I have very long dialogues with people about elections. But to me, that's important versus not having the chance to answer those questions. So yes.
I want to ask about the real ID.
Yes.
Do you not have to have your birth certificate, if you're divorced, your marriage certificates?
So real ID is through the state and federal government, but you have to have some sort of proof of citizenship. But when people talk about real ID is a way that you can prove citizenship, real IDs can be given to someone who does not have citizenship. There's a different kind of real ID. There's two types of real ID. There's a little symbol on your ID, and so there's two types of real ID. Kansas does the type where a non-citizen could get a real ID. And so that isn't necessarily the way you could change, prove it on voting. So, right. But it goes to, yeah. But it still goes to, there are lots of ways that we can prove citizenship without forcing a voter to come into my office and show me documents and so forth. We have that data. Yeah. Now, access to it is where we've struggled, because the federal government has most of that, and we've struggled with how you get access to that. And then always be cautious of data. I had a voter a few years ago where Social Security had made him dead, and he was not. And it was a mess for him because they had declared him dead. Well, we get all of that information, so we had removed his voter registration. And he called it, and the poor gentleman, like he had been dealing with this for weeks, because everybody just said, oh, Social Security said it, so therefore it's true. So we were able to fix it, but sometimes there is a mistake. Any questions? I know I went a little long, but I very much appreciate the opportunity to serve you and serve in this role. And I look forward to guiding us over the next few years. When I ran for office, I knew that there would be changes in elections. Probably couldn't anticipate just how much, but I always consider it a privilege that I get to help be part of this. So, yes.
One last thing, I think that we all want to say thank you to you, because we think you're one of the best, and we really appreciate everything you do for us.
Thank you.